Poverty is not just a wound on the body, it is a slow fire that burns the soul until nothing is left but ashes. For years, that fire lived inside me. Every morning I woke before dawn, hoping the new day would bring some work. Some days I carried bricks at construction sites until my back ached. On others, I went door to door, asking if anyone needed a helper. Sometimes I found a few hours of labor, but most evenings I returned home empty-handed, my hands cracked and my heart heavy. The sight that awaited me each night tore me apart. My children crying with hunger, their little voices echoing in the silence of our small home. My wife Shazia had grown weary of this life. The lines on her face deepened with frustration and her eyes no longer held warmth. She would sit in the dim light of the oil lamp and say, "How long will this go on? Is there no way out of this misery?" I always answered her with words of patience, telling her to keep faith and believe that things would change. But deep inside, I knew my own words had lost meaning. I too was tired of being poor, tired of being helpless, tired of failing as a husband and father. One night, as silence filled the room, Shazia spoke in a voice that shook me. "There's a way," she said. I looked at her confused. Her eyes didn't meet mine. "Some women," she continued, "after their marriages end, look for men to fulfill a religious formality. They pay for it. If we agree to this, we could earn enough to change our lives." I froze, staring at her as if I hadn't heard right. "You're talking about selling our dignity," I said, my voice trembling. But she kept pressing, reminding me of our starving children, of the endless nights when we had no food, of the future that looked darker with every passing day. I refused again and again, but her words clung to me like thorns. Poverty chains a man slowly. It doesn't break him in one blow, it drags him down until his spirit collapses. And one night, that chain finally pulled me under. I said yes. That was the night our lives changed forever. I didn't know it then, but by accepting her plan, I had walked into a darkness that would haunt my soul for years. The path ahead was paved with sin, guilt, and regret, and once we stepped onto it, there was no turning back. Section 2. A Sinful Business, approximately 450 words. The first time I followed Shazia's plan, it felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. My hands shook and my chest felt heavy, but poverty whispered louder than my conscience. That whisper said, "Just once, only this time, then everything will be fine." Yet the truth was, once you step into darkness, it never lets you go so easily. Days turned into weeks, and the guilt began to eat me alive. Shazia grew colder, more calculating. To her, it was business, a transaction that promised comfort and wealth. She would talk about it as if she were managing a trade, not selling the soul of her husband. Her calmness terrified me. I could see something dying inside me every time I obeyed her, something sacred that could never be replaced. At night, when everyone slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, hearing my own heartbeat echo like a drum of shame. My prayers no longer felt pure. My reflection in the mirror had become that of a stranger, a man without peace, without light. I began to count the number of times I gave in to her demands. 70 times I buried my dignity, and 70 times my conscience screamed inside me. But I silenced it, the way a man silences a crying child when he can no longer bear the sound. Shazia didn't see it that way. She thought money could erase guilt. "Look around," she would say, waving the bills in her hands. "Our children eat well now. We're living better than before. Why regret what feeds us?" But I couldn't explain to her that the food on our table tasted of sin. It filled the stomach but poisoned the soul. Then, one evening, Shazia came to me with that same cold ambition in her eyes. "Just one last time," she said. "This is the final deal. After this, we'll never have to struggle again." I wanted to refuse, but her words, her insistence, and the haunting memories of hunger weakened me once more. That night, when the woman arrived, I noticed something different about her. She looked fragile, her face pale, her eyes sunken, as if she carried a world of grief inside her. Shazia, without emotion, guided her to the room and told me to go. My feet felt like they were made of stone. As I pushed the door open, the sight before me froze my breath. The woman had tied a scarf to the ceiling fan and was about to hang herself. I rushed forward, shouting, grabbing her, untying the knot as she fell into my arms, trembling and crying uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her face like rain from a storm that had been waiting years to fall. I didn't know it then, but that moment would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life, my wife, and the meaning of sin. The woman sat on the floor, her body shaking, her breath ragged between sobs. I knelt beside her, still trembling myself, trying to understand what had just happened. My voice came out weak and uneven. "Why would you do this? Why would you end your life?" She didn't answer immediately. She clutched her scarf tightly, her tears soaking into the fabric. Then, through a choked voice, she said, "Because I was brought here by lies. I didn't come willingly." Her words hit me like a slap. I stared at her, confused, my heart pounding in my chest. She wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and continued, "My name is Ayesha. I once had a home, a husband, and peace. But the woman you call your wife, Shazia, is the reason I lost everything." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice trembling. She looked straight into my eyes. "Yes," she said. "Shazia destroyed my life. She is the reason I am here today, broken and alone." My head started spinning. My throat felt dry. "Tell me everything," I whispered. Ayesha's words came out slowly, painfully, as if each sentence cost her a piece of herself. "My husband's name was Zahid. He was a small trader. We weren't rich, but we were happy. We lived with gratitude and faith. Then one day, your wife entered our lives. She came pretending to help with business problems, but her intentions were darker. She trapped Zahid, made him drift away from me. I saw the change in his eyes, the distance in his heart. He stopped talking to me, stopped coming home early. One day, he confessed. He wanted to leave me for her." Her voice broke. She covered her face, sobbing. I begged her to stop. I told her she was destroying a home, but she didn't care. She pushed Zahid to divorce me. She took away my peace, my respect, my family, and when my life had nothing left, she sent me here. I sat frozen, unable to move. My hands trembled. The room spun around me. I didn't want to believe her, yet deep inside, something whispered that it was true. I had seen that side of Shazia, the cold ambition, the hunger for control, the arrogance of power. Ayesha reached into her bag and pulled out one envelope. Inside were letters, Zahid's handwriting, filled with affection and confession. Shazia's name appeared again and again. Then she unfolded a divorce paper where witnesses had written her name as the cause of their separation. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands shook so violently that the paper nearly slipped from my fingers. I had no defense left for the woman I once called my wife. That night, I realized I was living with someone whose heart had turned to stone, a woman who could destroy others for her own comfort, and the worst truth of all was that I had helped her do it. I walked home that night like a man carrying a corpse on his back, heavy, lifeless, and full of guilt. Every step echoed with the same question: how could I have been so blind? The streets were silent, but inside my mind, a storm was raging. The woman I had trusted, the one I thought was struggling beside me through poverty, had been feeding on the pain of others. The realization crushed me. When I reached home, Shazia was sitting on the bed, calmly counting money as if nothing in the world could disturb her peace. The sound of those bills rustling between her fingers made my blood run cold. She looked up with her usual smugness. "You're late," she said. "Did the woman give you any trouble?" I didn't reply. My throat was dry, and my heart was pounding so loudly that I could barely hear my own thoughts. I just stared at her. This woman, who had once been my companion in hardship, now a stranger cloaked in greed. She frowned. "What's wrong with you?" she asked impatiently. I wanted to shout. I wanted to throw the truth in her face. The letters, the divorce papers, Aisha's tears. But something stopped me. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe disbelief. I just said quietly, "Nothing." and went to the corner to lie down. But I didn't sleep. The ceiling above me felt like a witness staring down in judgment. All night, I thought of Ayesha, her trembling hands, her broken voice, her words echoing. She destroyed my life. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the noose hanging from the fan and felt the weight of my own sins pulling me down. The next morning, as the first light entered the room, I looked at Shazia again. She was humming softly while folding money into neat bundles. Something inside me snapped. "We're not doing this anymore," I said firmly. She stopped and turned, her face tightening. "What are you talking about?" "This," I said, gesturing to the money. "All of it. The deceit, the shame. It ends today." She laughed, a cold, hollow laugh that made my skin crawl. "Don't be foolish," she said. "This is what saved us from starvation. Without this, we'd be begging on the streets." I took a step closer, my voice shaking but steady. "It didn't save us, Shazia. It killed something inside us. Every coin you count is stained with someone's tears. We've become what we once despised." Her smile vanished. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, maybe anger, maybe fear, but it passed quickly. "You're weak," she said bitterly. "That's why you'll always stay poor." I didn't answer. The decision had already been made. I would no longer walk the road that led to the death of my soul. That morning, as I stepped out of the house, the air felt different, colder but cleaner. I didn't know what awaited me next, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't live another day as the servant of Shazia's greed. The morning after that confrontation felt heavier than any before. I had barely slept, but my mind was clear. I knew what I had to do. The time for silence was over. I could no longer carry the burden of guilt or let my wife drag me deeper into the pit she had built with her own greed. When I entered the small living room, Shazia was already awake. She sat at the table with her usual calmness, sipping tea and counting the money from last night. The sound of coins clinking against each other stabbed through my chest. She looked up, her lips curling into that familiar smirk. "You're early. Good. We have another guest coming tonight," she said casually. I stood there, staring at her. My voice came out firm and steady, unlike before. "No more, Shazia. This will not continue. I'm done." Her eyebrows shot up, amusement flashing in her eyes. "Done? What nonsense is this? You think you can survive again on daily labor and empty promises? Look around you, the food, the clothes, the roof over our heads. You think prayers built this?" I clenched my fists, holding back the anger burning inside me. "Maybe prayers didn't build it," I said, "but sin did. And every brick of this house smells of it. You've turned our lives into a market of shame. You've used me to destroy others. I can't live like this anymore." Her expression darkened. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You're ungrateful," she spat. "If I hadn't taken charge, you'd still be begging for work on the streets. I saved you, I fed your children, and this is how you repay me?" Her words hit me hard, but they couldn't shake my decision. "You didn't save me," I replied quietly. "You enslaved me. You took my hunger and used it against me. You buried my faith and called it survival." There was silence, a thick, suffocating silence. Then, in a voice full of contempt, she said, "Fine, leave. Let's see how long you survive without me." I nodded slowly. My heart was breaking, but it also felt lighter than ever. "You're right, Shazia," I said. "I will leave. Because I'd rather die poor than live rich in sin." Her eyes widened in disbelief as I walked toward the door. "You're walking away from everything," she screamed. I turned back one last time. "No," I said softly. "I'm walking toward peace." At that moment, I felt the invisible chains that had bound me for years finally snap. I stepped out into the morning light, the cool air brushing against my face. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely. The world outside was still harsh and uncertain, but at least it was honest. That day marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. When I walked out of that house, I carried nothing with me, no money, no belongings, only the weight of my past. The street outside felt strangely quiet, almost cleansing. For the first time in years, the air didn't smell of guilt. I kept walking aimlessly until I found myself near the small rented house where Aisha lived. I stood there for a long moment before knocking, unsure whether I had the right to face her again. When she opened the door, surprise flashed in her eyes. She looked weaker than before, but there was a fragile calm about her. I spoke softly, almost apologetically. "I left her," I said. "I couldn't live that life anymore." Aisha stared at me in silence, trying to read the truth in my eyes. I continued, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to help you to fix what I can, even if it's too little, too late." She sat down slowly and said, "You can't erase the past. But if your intentions are honest, maybe both of us can start again." Her words carried both pain and hope. Days turned into weeks. I helped her find small stitching work from nearby houses while I went back to doing labor. My body ached from lifting heavy loads again. But strangely, the pain felt pure. There was no guilt in it, no shame. Each drop of sweat was like a prayer washing away my sins. One evening, as the sun sank behind the rooftops, I came home exhausted. Aisha was sitting near the window, sewing by the dim glow of a lantern. She looked up and smiled faintly. That small smile, so gentle and unpretentious, filled the room with warmth. "You look tired," she said softly. "I am," I admitted, "but it's a good kind of tired." We lived quietly, simply. The meals were plain, the clothes old, but the peace inside our small home was worth more than all the money Shazia had ever counted. Slowly, trust grew between us, two broken people learning to live again. One night, as rain tapped softly on the roof, I said to her, "Aisha, we've both lost too much in life, but maybe, if you allow it, we can build something honest together." She didn't speak for a while. Then she looked up, her eyes glistening in the lantern light, and said, "I'm willing to try." We married quietly a few days later. No celebrations, no guests, just two people making a promise before God to live with truth and dignity. That day I didn't gain wealth, but I gained something greater, a second chance. Our journey had begun again, not with riches or promises, but with the strength of repentance and faith that maybe, just maybe, life could still be kind. Life after our simple marriage began like the quiet dawn after a long storm. The noise of guilt had faded, replaced by the soft rhythm of survival. We had little, just a few utensils, a small mat, and hope, but the air inside our home carried peace. I went back to the kind of work most people despised, carrying cement bags, cleaning storage rooms, doing odd jobs that barely paid enough for bread. Yet, every time I returned home, exhausted and soaked in sweat, Aisha's smile greeted me like sunlight breaking through clouds. She never complained. If there wasn't enough food, she'd say, "It's all right. We still have each other." Her patience humbled me. Often, I'd find her sewing clothes late into the night, her fingers moving with quiet grace. Sometimes I would sit beside her silently, listening to the faint rustle of thread and fabric, feeling an unfamiliar sense of contentment. One evening, I came home to find her reciting verses softly, her voice trembling with emotion. The candlelight flickered across her face, making her look almost angelic. When she finished, she turned to me and said, "I was just thinking, God tests people in strange ways. Some are tested with hunger, others with temptation, but only those who return to truth are truly rich." Her words pierced me deeply. I had spent years chasing the illusion of wealth, only to find peace in the hands of a woman who owned nothing but honesty. For the first time, I felt that maybe redemption wasn't impossible after all. Over time, our life began to change in small, beautiful ways. People in the neighborhood noticed my sincerity and hard work. A factory owner who had seen me before offered me a job handling supplies. "You're an honest man," he said. "That's hard to find these days." It wasn't a fortune, but it was stability. With each paycheck, I saw Aisha's eyes shine with gratitude. We fixed our leaky roof, bought a second-hand fan, and finally could afford fresh fruit for our meals. To an outsider, it might have looked like nothing, but to us, it was abundance. Then, one afternoon at the market, as I was leaving the factory, I saw a face from a past I had tried to bury. Shazia. She was sitting near a broken wall, her clothes tattered, her hair unkempt. In her arms was a small child, crying from hunger. Her eyes met mine, tired, hollow, filled with shame. She looked at me and whispered, "You were right. I destroyed everything for money." I stood there speechless, my heart twisting in pity and pain. The woman who once mocked my weakness now looked like a fallen shadow of herself. Without a word, I reached into my pocket and handed her the money I had just earned. "Feed your child," I said softly, "and seek forgiveness while there's still time." As I walked away, I didn't feel anger, only sorrow. Life had shown both of us what true wealth meant. That evening, as I walked back home, the air felt heavy with memories. I kept seeing Shazia's face, the same eyes that once burned with pride, now dulled by hunger and regret. Her image stayed in my mind all the way home. I didn't feel victorious. Instead, I felt an ache that words couldn't describe. Life had punished her far more harshly than I ever could. It was justice, but it didn't bring joy. When I entered the house, Aisha was waiting, her sewing machine resting beside her. She noticed the weight in my eyes and asked gently, "What happened?" I told her everything, how I had seen Shazia begging on the street, how she had looked fragile and defeated. Aisha listened quietly, then said, "God has strange ways of teaching us. You chose truth when it was hardest to choose, and she chose greed when it was easiest to avoid. That's why your ending is peace, and hers is pain." Her words filled me with both comfort and humility. I realized that the difference between salvation and destruction wasn't in wealth or power. It was in the choices we made when no one was watching. Months passed. Ayesha and I began to rebuild our lives brick by brick. She became my strength, the calm voice that steadied me whenever I faltered. We didn't have much, but our home was filled with laughter and light. And soon, a new blessing arrived. One morning, Ayeti placed my hand on her stomach and whispered, "We're going to be parents." I couldn't hold back my tears. I fell to my knees, thanking God for giving me this gift. I had been certain I didn't deserve happiness after the life I'd lived, yet here it was, a new beginning wrapped in innocence. But life, as always, tested that happiness. I started working longer hours at the factory, hoping to save enough for our child's future. One evening, while moving heavy crates, my hand got caught in a machine. The pain was instant and unbearable. Blood poured down my arm, and I collapsed. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The doctor said quietly, "Your hand is badly damaged. You may not be able to work like before." For a moment, despair returned. I thought of Ayesha, of the baby, of the small home we had built. But when she walked into the room and held my hand gently, she said, "Don't cry. If one door closes, another will open. God never leaves those who walk with honesty." Her faith was stronger than any medicine. I realized then that strength wasn't in the body, it was in the heart that refused to give up. That accident, though painful, became another test, one that would again reveal who I had become and what I truly believed in. The weeks after my accident were long and full of uncertainty. My injured hand refused to move properly, and each failed attempt to grip even a glass of water filled me with frustration. There were nights I sat awake, staring at my bandaged arm, wondering how I would provide for my family. But Aisha never let me sink into despair. She would place her hand over mine and say softly, "Don't worry. The one who fed us before will feed us again. You only lost strength in your hand, not in your faith." Her words gave me courage. When I could no longer do heavy labor, I searched for other ways to survive. One morning, as the city woke to the sound of vendors calling out prices, I bought an old cart from a scrap dealer with my last savings. I began selling fruits and vegetables on the roadside. The first day was humiliating. People who once knew me as a factory worker now laughed. "From laborer to cartman," someone mocked. But I ignored them. I had learned that honest work, no matter how small, carried dignity that no wealth could buy. Aisha stood by my side like a silent soldier. While I pushed the cart under the scorching sun, she stitched clothes and repaired torn garments for the neighbors. We often went to bed with nothing but tea and dry bread, but our hearts were light. Every coin we earned was clean. Slowly, the laughter of the mockers faded, replaced by the respect of those who saw our perseverance. Months passed, and the day our son was born became the most beautiful day of my life. I still remember holding him for the first time, tiny, warm, innocent. Tears rolled down my face as I whispered a prayer. "O God, make me worthy of this child. Let him never see the darkness I once lived in." As time went by, my small fruit stall grew. People trusted me because I never lied about prices or weights. Word spread quickly. The honest vendor, they called me. One afternoon, my old factory owner came by to buy fruit. He looked surprised to see me. After a few minutes of conversation, he said, "I remember your honesty. Would you like to work with me again? Not as a laborer this time, but to manage our accounts." That moment felt like a sign from above. The same honesty that once seemed to ruin me had become my greatest strength. That night, as Ayesha held our newborn close, she said with a smile, "Didn't I tell you? When you walk on the path of truth, the journey may be long, but it never ends in loss." Her words settled deep in my heart. The wounds on my hand were healing, but the greater healing had already begun, the healing of my soul. Years passed quietly, and our lives began to settle into a rhythm of peace that poverty could never disturb. Our son grew strong and curious, his laughter echoing through the small courtyard of our modest home. Every evening, I returned from work to find him running toward me with open arms, his joy washing away the exhaustion of the day. Aisha would stand by the door, smiling softly, her eyes filled with the same calm gratitude that had carried us through every storm. We didn't have much, just enough to live, to eat, to sleep peacefully, but our home was filled with something no amount of money could buy: contentment. I often sat outside at night, looking up at the stars, remembering the man I once was, the man who had traded faith for comfort, peace for gold. Now, years later, I finally understood that true wealth is not what fills your pockets, it's what fills your heart with light. One day, I heard news that Shazia had fallen ill. People said she was living alone, with no one to care for her. For a moment, the old bitterness flickered inside me, but Aisha's gentle voice returned to my mind. Kindness never makes you small. That evening, I went to the hospital. She was lying on a small bed by the window, thin and frail, her face barely recognizable. When she saw me, her eyes widened in disbelief. Then, tears began to fall. "I thought you'd never forgive me," she whispered weakly. "I destroyed everything we had." "You were right. Wealth built on sin brings nothing but emptiness." I sat beside her and said softly, "I forgave you a long time ago. What you did broke me, but it also taught me what truth means. Don't waste what time you have left in regret. Seek peace while you still can." She closed her eyes and wept silently. I left some money for her care and walked out, feeling the wind brush against my face as if it carried away the last traces of anger from my heart. When I reached home, Ayesha and our son were waiting at the door. I held them close, realizing that the life I once thought was ruined had actually been rebuilt, stronger, purer, and whole. That night, as my son fell asleep in my arms, I whispered a prayer of gratitude. "O God, thank you for breaking me once, only to rebuild me better." The fire of poverty had once burned me from within, but through repentance, faith, and love, it had turned into a light, one that would guide me for the rest of my days.